Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex is one of the most polarizing games in the franchise. I really don't know if there is another game in this series that has taken more stones thrown at it over the years, and as time has gone on, it seems the game has only become more of a punching bag. I have to admit, originally discovering this viewpoint of the game was a bit shocking for me. As someone who grew up playing this title as much as I would play the Naughty Dog trilogy, I was definitely on the outs with others' opinions. How could what I considered a normal Crash Bandicoot experience be this divisive? Well, as years have gone on and more replays of the Wrath of Cortex have taken place, I too have seen the cracks. There are definitely some inconsistencies with what has come before in this game that, when you do take a look at the mixed reviews that this game received, start to make a lot of sense. I accept those things. What I don't accept is just how often people seem to forget the unfortunate circumstances this game was up against. And if all my playthroughs, and most importantly my recent ones, have any one point to get across, is that the Wrath of Cortex is still an honest attempt at a Crash game. Today, I would like to discuss that. I want to talk about the ways the Wrath of Cortex succeeds as a Crash game, fails as a Crash game, and where it now stands compared to the rest of the series for me. I would like to highlight that changing someone's opinion of a game is not my goal with this retrospective series. What I am here to do is to take my favorite series, highlight the things I love, critique the problems I notice, and reminisce on the product as a whole. That's all I can really do. Now then, let's take a look at what I consider the most unfortunate game in the series. This is a Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex retrospective.
Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex.
Let me set the stage for you. It's December 25th, 2001. You and your brother have both thought to have opened all your Christmas gifts, until your parents pushed the two of you a bigger, heavier box. Inside is a PS2 console and a copy of Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. The two of you graciously thank your parents, rush to the living room, carefully tear open that box, plop that beautiful blue disc into the system, and join Crash in the 6th generation of gaming. It was beautiful. Another exciting Crash Bandicoot adventure starring my favorite characters. Gameplay I was still enamored with, graphics my eyes couldn't comprehend, a soundtrack I would never stop listening to. What more could you ask for? This was Crash Bandicoot back in its proper glory, which was a big deal at the time. As fun and different as Crash Team Racing and Crash Bash were, at the end of the day, they were spin-offs. It had been 3 years since Crash traditionally platformed, and I think that went into account with Traveler's Tale when designing the Wrath of Cortex. I think that explains why, in more than just a few ways, the Wrath of Cortex is just about everything you'd expect from a Crash Bandicoot title released in 2001. The same way each game in the trilogy built its structure off the previous title, Wrath of Cortex was no different. Many people consider this game to be warped on the PS2, and it's not hard to see why. I've already stated in a previous video that I believe each mainline title had a core theme its gameplay structure was based on. Crash 1 was an introductory piece, a proof of product that planted the roots of what Crash's gameplay was, and those roots have stayed grounded with each further installment up to this point. Crash 2 was the natural next step of that gameplay. It was about refinements, mostly focused on level design and movement. That's why even today it's still considered the best platformer in the series. Warped was an innovative take on that formula. It introduced more shakeups to the gameplay than thought possible at that time, but never let itself stray too far from Crash's base roots while also enhancing those roots. That is why the game became so divisive. The platforming was so masterful, but it felt like it was always interrupted by some type of variance to the gameplay. How much of those mini games you liked really could make or break Warped for you. Each game had its own core thesis, and I believe this is what shaped their identity the most. This leaves Wrath of Cortex in a awkward position. While the game itself doesn't really get to introduce anything new to the franchise from a real gameplay perspective, it gets to slot in and be more of an introductory piece for Crash's gameplay to a new audience. You'd have to admit that by the jump to the 6th generation of gaming, Crash's traditional gameplay had pretty much molded into its final shape. With Wrath of Cortex eventually being on multiple consoles, I think it was a good idea to design a game similar to what was seen in the trilogy. This was a brand new generation of players, and I think it makes a lot of sense for Traveler's Tale to look at what came before and do their best to emulate it. I'm sure in retrospect, many people would have preferred they pull mostly from Crash 2 for this, but I think it is important to remember that Warp did review the best of the Crash games, and it was the most recent game in the series, so it was pretty much guaranteed which game would catch the developer's attention. So in result, what we really have here is what feels like a sequel to Warp. You can pretty much line up most things in this game to Warp and make the connection. That isn't particularly a bad thing, however, because if there's one way the Wrath of Cortex does stand out from the rest of the series, it's in its style. Take the Warp Room for instance. This is very clearly an analog for the Time Twister, but this place gives such a different feel that I can still love them both for completely different reasons. The Time Twister was this big powerful machine out in the middle of nowhere that could take you to many different points in time. Wrath of Cortex's Warp Room feels much more enclosed and, funny enough, almost unfinished. I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean it more in a stylistic way. I think we sometimes forget this place is a VR system made by Coco in the garage of the Bandicoot's tiny house. This girl has made gateways to different spots on the planet and space, and maybe for that reason alone this Warp Room gets my pass. Not to mention, it's one of the most expressive level selects in the franchise, with each section being based on an element. I tell you, the first time I ran around this place while the electric gates were still up, my imagination ran wild because I needed to see every level this game had to offer. This Warp Room may be small in comparison to the others, but this expressive design gets me hyped to jump into all these levels, and I think that's a job well done for a level select. And of course, when you get into the levels, the environments and scenery always feel so one of a kind. I think something I really appreciate in the Wrath of Cortex is how different each level feels even if they share similar biomes. I actually find this as a overall level improvement from the games before. In the trilogy, level variety was great, but I think a big critique myself and others always had was how often you go to the same level setting and just play that area at a different time of day or with a slightly adjusted layout. I still think Crash 2 suffered the most from this. Controlling Crash was fantastic in that game, but I have realized I do sometimes get a little burnt out towards the middle or end of that game with its actual levels. For instance, the snow levels always start to bore me for some reason, which is funny because Snow Go is one of my favorite Crash levels of all time. You'd think I want a lot more of it, but in Crash 2's case, it comes off like they were just trying to do the same thing again and again. Other than a couple of swimming or castle levels, you never really get that in the Wrath of Cortex. Instead, you get a collection of levels that you could never mistake for another. It's an interesting choice, but I do think it's pretty nice how the game kicks things off with a level like Arctic Antics. This snowy, wonderfully crafted pathway full of stone-crafted structures, lines of penguins and skiers going up and down ice slides. There's a freezing lake to ice skate over and pools of freezing water with giant fish jumping out for you to avoid. One thing I've always appreciated in this level is just how well the camera works to keep a good distance between you and Crash as you run in and out of doorways and igloos. It really helps keep a good pace of the level and bump up the overall quality. I can kinda see why this level was picked first when you look at it like this. I'd also like to add that Arctic Antics comes fitted with a bonus round and a death route holding the blue gem, so in actuality, Arctic Antics just might be the most ambitious first level in the series. In the same Warp Room, you can find wizards and lizards. I still think it's surprising how well Crash games do gothic castle settings, given the fact that the rest of the levels are usually pretty peppy. But man, I just love this entire place. It feels like I'm playing Cortex Castle from CTR. I love the moodier use of purples and browns all throughout the level, and just how dressed up this place is with suits of armors, wizards and bats, and knights for some reason in their underwear. Oh, and not to mention there's a giant dragon that chases you in this level. You'd think with this game being the 4th game in a row to have a chase level, the novelty would wear off, but no, this type of stuff still hits. I really love Crash and Burn. This entire level feels like a set piece. I just love the idea of the whole level taking place on and around an active volcano. It's a really cool idea because now the level itself gets to be one of the hazards you're avoiding as fireballs rain down on you in this deserted village at the base of the island. I think it's really cool how you work your way from the shore all the way to the peak of this natural disaster. I think Crash levels feel the best when you feel like you're getting somewhere, and Crash and Burn does this really well. It actually feels like the type of progress you get in Crash 1, which is just the best. And a level that has seriously grown on me in my recent playthrough is Cortex Vortex. I just love when the last level of the main campaign feels like it means something. Not only is the name of the level a sick callback for the series, the level really does make it feel like you're working your way through Cortex's space station just before the last encounter. I just love the colorful electric hazards all over the place, and how this level feels like it's full with the most lab assistance in the game. The platforming in this level is also just fitting for a finale. This place just rocks. I'm going to say something that I didn't think I would. I like Cortex Vortex more as a last level than I do the lab. I never expected to say something like this, but come on. As per usual, vehicles are a very prominent aspect of this Crash game. I believe this is where most people get lost in the Wrath of Cortex. Now, trust me, I get it. As someone who doesn't mind a shakeup or two to the gameplay, I'm normally pretty chill on the vehicles. However, I'd be crazy not to mention how just the sheer number of vehicles in this game is like nothing else seen in the franchise. Even Warped, a game that's constantly under fire for its overuse of vehicles, doesn't really hold a candle to the number of diverse vehicles in this game. I know right off the bat that does sound like doom and gloom, but the same way the levels don't repeat much, each vehicle does for the most part have you doing something new in this game. Like, seriously, there is a lot of variety in this aspect. Copter packs, airplanes, mine carts, four-wheelers. You gotta admit, the first playthrough of this game was almost shocking with how much new stuff you did with Crash. And it's not like it's all bad. From what I've gathered, many people actually like the Atmosphere. And since it's the only vehicle that is repeated 4 times, I have to assume the developers did as well. I can't really blame them for this because the atmosphere does have some type of charm on it. I don't know if it's just the joy of seeing Crash rolling around in a hamster ball, or the fun ways you need to traverse these levels, but this thing has always felt like an instant classic to the series for me. While the later levels that use the ball, like Eskimo Roll and Medieval Madness, tend to focus on using the atmosphere for more precision control, I really like Bamboozled for how out of control some of the sections feel. You get to build up so much speed down these winding ramps that it feels like you're on a roller coaster or playing Super Monkey Ball. It makes such a big impression early on, and I think that's why I always remember this vehicle so well. I think another important vehicle is no doubt the mech suit. Unfortunately, its praises will not be as loud as the Atmosphere, because for as cool as this vehicle is in theory, it's pretty middling. I don't know how this pattern keeps happening, but just like the jetpack in Crash 2 and the motorcycle in Warp, the mech suit, the premier vehicle of this game that got the most marketing or on the front of the case, it's just not that great. It's not terrible, but it also isn't even mid. It's like somewhere between mid and terrible, which by no means isn't a great thing, but I have come to terms with it on my most recent playthroughs. This thing is really clunky, and its hitbox is massive. Not to mention, it has one of the worst stationary jumps I think I've ever controlled in a game, but it does come kitted with a Wampa Bazooka, so it kinda evens out. I think where I get the most fun with the mech suit are from the levels that have it and how the game forces you to use it. I'd be lying if I didn't admit the level Droid Void wasn't already pretty cool with its atmosphere. Making it through this space station and its electrified traps and interesting enemies was already a good time. But when you find that mech suit for the first time and run through this dark hallway filled with nitro and shooting lab assistants taking cover behind crates, it's pretty cool actually. They really try to get you to use that bazooka a lot, and the level does pick up a different vibe once you're in that suit that I think stuck with me. I think that goes double for Crate Balls of Fire, which has you use the suit for a chase section. The suit's naturally clunky design actually makes this part more interesting because it's even more challenging than a regular chase section ever is. So even though this vehicle is pretty middling, I do find fun in it, and most of the other vehicles too. Like I said, there's so much variety here that you'll always find some crazy different thing the Bandicoots are doing just around the corner. Oh, and notice I said Bandicoots, because I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that for the first time in the series, Coco Bandicoot is fully playable in her own levels. Finally, she is platforming, and while she may only have a few of her own levels, I think they make a good first impression for her. I can't tell you just how surprising that first level load was for me when Coco bounced Crash on the head to take his place, and you come to in Banzai Bonsai. This beautiful Asian-inspired level is one of my favorites in the game. There are so many different enemies here, and the colors of this world pop so well. It's a very cool level to use a fully realized Coco in for the first time. What's cool about Coco is that she also, just like Crash, gets her own vehicle sections in her levels, and honestly, I think they're some of the best in the game. In the level Tsunami, you work your way through a town preparing for the coming natural disaster. It's pretty well done actually. A lot of the enemies are townsfolk packing up their things and either attempting to leave town or make it home in time. The rain and thunder in this level set the mood just right, and as soon as you hit the middle waypoint, you hop on a scooter and no joke outrun the tsunami. It's probably one of the funniest sections in a Crash game, to be honest. Coco is literally outrunning a natural disaster on her little pink scooter with just a couple of speed kicks. It's kinda ridiculous. It's a really good chase, however. I think the amount of stage destruction happening in the background goes underappreciated a bit because this town is getting destroyed behind you. Not to mention some of the leftover civilians are getting caught in all this destruction too. And then the chase just ends because Coco did something as simple as closing a door. It's all kinda silly, and I just love it. I also have always thought it was really cool and kind of dark how the death route is a section back through the flooded streets to find a gem. Even though this town has been completely flooded, we're still going to get that gem. In the level Avalanche, there's a similar thing going on here with a level taking place through a ski resort. The level has you work your way up the mountain and end off in a snowboard chase down the mountainside. I love trying to slide through each set of flags to earn the gem at the end. I used to go out of my way to replay this section as a kid. I thought it was that fun. Coco's level count overall might not be very large, but there's some great sections in this game. It truly helps the game feel like the next step for the Bandicoots as a whole. Along with all of that, there really is a lot in this game that does feel consistent with the other entries. Breaking all the boxes feels just as fun as usual. Collecting Wumpa Fruit makes that great sound effect that always made me want to collect every single last one. Levels still had that perfect length that Crash games need for the most part. The overall presentation of this game was always to me in a similar place as the games before. The music and cutscenes in my opinion is too loud, but other than that, yeah, good quality. I know it's joked on now, but at the time, seriously, these graphics and models were passable. Personally, I still think the graphics themselves look good, and the way every yellow, orange, and blue pops off the screen, the important characters are a joy to look at. Coco especially stands out really well with her big blonde hair, and this Crash model has grown on me over the years. I still think he's a bit wide when he stands and his face might be even bigger than normal, but the model is still a solid recreation that really does fit with this game. I've had tons of time to admire the model while watching Crash falling in that loading screen. Say what you want about the long loads, I really dig the loading screen in this game for some reason. I wish that was a joke, but it's not. Oh, and I know I haven't really mentioned it yet, but this game's soundtrack is top tier. Every level has a fun and fitting song to accompany you on your journey, and I'd be crazy not to have this game's soundtrack as one of my favorites of all time. The songs are so electric and so fun, and I listen to them in my free time. Seriously, I've been blasting H2O No for quite some time now. I mean it, man. Wrath of Cortex brings a lot to this series, and truth be told, the biggest thing it brought was a brand new antagonist. The Wrath of Cortex story takes place sometime after the trilogy. For some reason, it has become a big point of contention for people to determine if the Wrath of Cortex is truly a continuation of the trilogy, as the official Crash Bandicoot 4, or if it's about time that gets that title. For myself, it's never really mattered. Both games exist and lead off into their own endpoints. I would like to note, however, that the Wrath of Cortex is the first mainline title that does not pick up where the last game left off, truly making this game its own story away from anything Naughty Dog set up. So, for all intents and purposes, I always view this as just another Crash story. In my opinion, not every single thing needs to fit some type of canon or exist on some type of timeline. It's okay for a story to just be a story made by someone else. This probably helps explain why the upfront storytelling is even more lacking than a Crash story would normally have. Not saying the Crash stories in the trilogy were high literature or anything, but I still feel that the characters were taken at least a bit more seriously. Trust me, there was never a moment in the trilogy where the bad guys sat around the table and discussed how their evil productivity is way down. This seriously might be an even more unserious plot than CTR or Bash, and one of those stories had an alien in it. Uka Uka's threats have lost all the weight they had in Warped, and the other villains obviously aren't going to be of any help in this story. It's always been odd to me that Cortex was withholding information about his super weapon from Uka Uka. I'm not sure what exactly that little detail was trying to convey. However, this scene does lead to the news that Cortex has been developing a new super weapon of unbelievable strength. At the peak of Uka Uka's interest, they devise a plan to weight the powerful and dangerous elemental mass to power said super weapon. This act leads to a chain of events of natural disasters that pop up all around the world. leaving Crash and the group in another position where they must collect crystals to seal away the elementals and save the world. Truth be told, this is an even more forced excuse for Crash in the game to get out there and collect crystals again then in Warped. Don't really mean to cut the story down so early, but it does seem odd that the method to sealing away ultra-powerful elemental mass is something as simple as collecting 5 crystals. I can kinda see why these guys were sealed for so long. It then makes me question why even highlight the elemental mass so much in the first place, since they don't really get time to do anything except for jump Aku Aku at the beginning of the story, and then just pop up in load screens and spout little blurbs of very little interest.
Leave my levels alone!
I have a taste for some deep-fried Bandicoot.
Is there a draft in here?
Oh, I'm gonna shake, rattle, and roll your Bandicoot butt.
Well, the elemental mass are basically half the antagonistic force in this story. The main attraction, the proclaimed superweapon, is really who drives this plot. Crunch Bandicoot is a pretty cool character. I love this idea of Cortex attempting a redo of another boy Bandicoot, and it's very obvious he's been working hard to ensure Crunch's creation went properly. Wouldn't want to risk another Crash mishap. I love how Crunch's entire design seems to be mostly based on power, with a much bigger framed Bandicoot body filled out with muscles and a metal hand, which suggests even more experiments. I also like how Crunch has much bigger expressions than most characters, with his jagged eyebrows and ears really bringing home his evil, rough exterior. He is a very well done contrast to Crash, the much smaller and softer looking Bandicoot with brighter fur, compared to Crunch's more muted palette. I mean this in all respect. Crunch is the best thing that comes from Wrath of Cortex by far. I mean that both physically and thematically. I don't think it's an unpopular thing to say. A lot of us would like to see much more Crunch Bandicoot in future games, and a lot of that desire comes from how big of a presence he makes in his debut story. I might have just made fun of the plot a little bit, but I do love the way this game sets up Crunch as the main antagonist. Yeah, Cortex and Uka Uka may be holding the strings and basically running the show, but Crunch is the only person in this game who you physically have 5 separate encounters with. No boss character other than Cortex that's come before or after has ever had that much screen time. It sets this game up as this bout between 2 Bandicoots constantly going head to head, and honestly, it's really cool in its own regard. I'd also like to add that each encounter against Crunch has him enhanced by one of the 4 elemental mass. This is a cool way to give the mass a more supporting role in the story, while also keeping each encounter against the same person feeling fresh. I happen to love this method because it gives these 2 Bandicoots more flavorful fights while also acting as little story beats for Crunch's character. It begins with the Earth Elemental, Rocco. The 2 of you battle in a Atmosphere minigame where you 2 rush to turn destructive meteors to each other's side. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, it's probably the worst battle in the game, but it's your introduction to Crunch. I think what this fight does the best is begin a sort of lose arc for Crunch, where he has to take his loss on the chin and just look toward his next encounter against you by acting all tough and proud.
Listen, Crash, you may have outsmarted Rocco, but there are 3 more elemental masks where he came from. And just as luck would have it, they are all significantly more powerful. Ha! I have no doubt that the water elemental, Wawa, will make sure you never see the light of day.
Yeah, the water boy and I are gonna take you out. Ooh, I'm gonna rip you limb from limb.
In his second battle against Crash, he uses the water elemental, Wawa. It's a much better fight. Most people consider it difficult, actually. The timing of projectiles from high and low, added to the fact that you can't be on one platform for too long, does make for more of a challenging fight. The stage is also better suited for the element too, with you both fighting it out along this floating path in the middle of a hurricane. Again, it's a much better fight, but it still ends the same way for Crunch. A couple of well-timed jumps, some patience with crouches, and Crunch and Wawa both fall. Crunch lost again. It's at this point in the story where Crunch finally starts to rebel. He rejects using another mask to fight Crash in favor of his own strength. However, this is when you realize that he cannot refuse. Cortex and Uka Uka hold the strings, so he will continue to fight using the elemental mask only.
Oh, Cortex, come on! I don't need some flaming mask to help me! I can take Crash on by myself!
Crunch, you will do as I say. You and Pyro will vanquish Crash and his annoying friends.
So he does. And to no one's surprise, he loses again and again. Not the power of Pyro or Lolo are enough to stop Crash. And it's somewhere around here in the story where, as a kid, I first realized who Crunch Bandicoot really was. Not like it was some revolutionary take, but Crunch Bandicoot really is Crash if he never escaped from Cortex. A powerful Bandicoot with untapped potential forced to do work for someone else. One could wonder what Crash's life could be like if he never rebelled. And I think Crunch's story is the perfect example of that life. Cortex may be a genius. He may have the ability to make these powerful Bandicoot warriors, but he lacks the understanding of how to unlock their potential. He's too worried trying to please Uka Uka and stick to this rigid plan to realize it was never going to work in the first place. Crunch, a super weapon who in Cortex's words is strong enough to crush mountains and demolish cities, isn't even allowed to use that power. I find it ironic how in every boss battle with Crunch, when he uses an elemental mask, that Crash doesn't use a mask at all. I don't know if this was an intended pattern placed in the story, but I think it's safe to say that even in games prior, a Bandicoot works best with a mask when the relationship is symbiotic. Aku Aku and the Bandicoots are a team after all, but he never forces himself on them. That's why his crates exist. That is your choice to summon his help when you're going through your adventure. And while he may never directly be of use to you in boss battles, he's always there backing you up in any way he can. Rather, he's guiding your meteors or enhancing your mech suit, or showing you a weak point in Crunch's defenses. Aku is there every step of the way to support Crash and Coco on their journey, but he never runs the journey. Cortex can never understand a relationship with a powerful mask like that. How could he? Since the beginning, he's been blindly following the orders from Uka Uka. Any type of failure is met with threats and belittling. In Warped, I think the most uncomfortable scenes were the ones where Uka Uka would jump on Cortex's face and talk directly through him. There was never a reason for him to do this. It was solely a flex of power. This is a toxic relationship built on fear and dominance. This is the unfortunate lens Cortex views Mask through. And it's the reason Cortex forces Crunch to use Mask fully instead of any of its own strength. Don't you think it's weird how Cortex talks Crunch up at the beginning of the story about how powerful he is, but doesn't let him do anything on his own? Don't you think it's weird how in the last battle, Crunch stands 1 foot away from Crash but doesn't even attack him? He can't. He isn't allowed to. He has to use Elemental Mask again, even though that plan already failed. Though Crunch would probably rather have a proper one-on-one with the person he's been compared to since his experiments, he has to jump around the arena and rely on elemental powers over and over again until exhaustion. You know, I used to be confused when Crunch would punch Cortex on the field. I thought this was the most random moment in this boss fight, but now I realize it's a perfect visualization of Crunch's frustration boiling over, allowing him to attack his creator. I like to add that Crunch is being mind controlled in this story. Yeah, I still think he can talk out, but in situations like this, I'm sure Cortex is holding the strings. The fact that he's able to rebel in this manner shows how mentally and physically strong he is, and the fact that he can't use his real power pushed him to the edge, especially with Crash here, fighting as freely as he wants to. I always found it funny how Aku Aku just floats above the arena. His full belief in Crash only has him come down to point out moments when Crunch is weak. Other than that, he knows it isn't his fight and trusts Crash to win it. This is the stark difference between Crash and Crunch's life, and it made me view Crunch in a completely different light than I ever had before. I still think he's the more powerful Bandicoot. To be honest, if Crash and Crunch both fought while Crunch wasn't forced to use someone else's power, he'd probably win. It's untapped potential. But honestly, I think the game having you beat Crunch this many times works better than if you just fought him once at the end. I think all these fights allow you to see the differences between these two Bandicoots' lives. I know for a lot of people, the fact that you do fight one person this many times is a major point of contention. And yeah, I feel that. Really does seem like a waste to have a Rose Gallery like this present in the game and then not use them. Well, scratch that. We all know how they were used. But to be honest, I know I'm at risk of sounding crazy. I don't completely hate how the past bosses were used. Don't get me wrong, Goalie Tiny is always going to be a meme, and I'll never let them live this down. But for the rest of the time the bosses show up, it's pretty cool. There's something really funny about flying an airplane or spaceship and realizing Engine just kamikazed his ship at me. That actually cracks me up. There's a race with horrible controls that you have to win against these guys to take a crystal. Dingo Dial is spawning all over the island and that sinking feeling trying to crash your weird bug ship. I don't know, it's kind of cool to see these guys out in the field for once. It does feel weird being this close to some of them like this, but you have to admit, with some of these guys having already lost to Crash multiple times already, it's not too surprising to see them get demoted like this, and I find it fun to see. It's sad to see them treated like lab assistants, but I think what helps the story the most is how the main antagonist is so connected to Crash the way Crunch is. Crunch really is the star here, and even though the actual story that Raptor Cortex has on offer can be pretty bland as a whole, I think Crunch getting the screen time and having this arc at least helps the story make it over the finish line. Now, like I stated earlier, it's not like the previous game stories were 10 out of 10s or anything, but this is the first time I ever felt like a Crash story was working with a plot that felt like a rough draft. Crash 1 barely had a conventional story and was more focused on environmental progression with a very cliche goal. Crash 2's story was as simple and unshocking as physically possible, but still had a charming undertone it gave off by the end. And Warped introduced fun characters, had a simple plot, and a satisfying ending. Each story did just enough to complement this fun, seamless platforming adventure. Wrath of Cortex doesn't quite hit a similar beat like the others. It's very inconsistent in a lot of ways that go further than just storytelling. I wouldn't even say that you need to look that hard to realize that the Wrath of Cortex, frankly, just feels like it's from another world. It's no secret the Wrath of Cortex is a consistently frustrating Crash Bandicoot experience. It's no secret the game falls short in almost every aspect compared to the previous titles. It's no secret the game sits pretty low on most people's tier list these days because of this stuff. One could start to wonder why the game came out so different from the other games, even though Traveler's Tale made sure they were following pretty much the same formula. Linear platforming gameplay with a very slight collectathon feel. They brought the hallway level design, the simple controls, and made random shakeups to the gameplay. On paper, Traveler's Tale made a very on-beat Crash Bandicoot game. I believe that's why this game gets compared the way it does to the trilogy. Raptor Cortex comes off like it was always meant to be this next generation successor of everything Crash had done before. But what if I told you it was intended to be much different originally? The original concept for the Raptor Cortex was a game called Crash Bandicoot Worlds. Just like the Raptor Cortex, the game was meant to be a continuation of Crash's classic linear level design, but of course with some new adjustments and additions to the gameplay. Level design was going to be platform focused and hallway adjacent as always, but there were plans to throw in multiple pathways and openish areas and levels to explore more freely and make the game feel more free roaming than before. The game would also come with just a slightly more free camera for the player to control, along with a more updated Crash moveset that also had a slight bit more momentum. New moves for Crash consisted of things like a super slide high jump, which sounds a bit familiar to me. The premise of Crash Bandicoot Worlds revolved around Cortex turning a solar system into his own laboratory experiment. Each planet in that system would then be subjected to very harsh conditions, either extreme heat, extreme cold, completely blocked out from sunlight, or flooded. Each planet would also have a Neo-Cortex control center which would be in charge of keeping the planet in that harsh state. Crash would then travel to each world, collect keys from every section of the planet to infiltrate their research station, shut it down, then engage in combat with that planet's boss, a Neo-Cortex experimental life form, then go to the next planet and repeat. Cortex would be doing all this after being instructed by the new big bad character, Elemental, a name that is very on the nose. There's still not much known about this game. A lot of the greater details have yet to been unearthed. However, there is some information the game might have had a slightly more serious tone. There's the detail of a possibility of there being some type of new girl character. One of these suggests she could have been Coco's evil twin sister, who'd show up in levels and attempt to lead Crash down the wrong path. The other suggests the character would have been Cortex's daughter, Rio Cortex, who would have played more of a love interest role for Crash. Apparently in the last encounter, there would be 2 separate endings depending on your gameplay, where Rio would accidentally die by the hands of Cortex, but if you were quick enough, she could be saved. Obviously, everything in this original concept was not set in stone. Game development is very flexible, and there will always be an unprecedented amount of factors that affect the project on its way to the finish line. But what upsets me is that the original concept was clearly working towards some form of development, and his life cut short before it could ever reach close to that full potential, as Universal fell out with Mark Cerny and Sony, made a deal with Konami to publish Crash Bandicoot games for next-generation consoles, and broke Crash Bandicoot's exclusivity with Sony. Traveler's Tale was given the project and forced to start from scratch and only had 12 months to finish. I would like to add that while Traveler's Tale wasn't exactly new to making games, and yes, some sort of solid game could probably be made in 12 months, this was going to be their first PlayStation 2 project with a franchise they've never worked on before. Not to mention, the PS2 was very new at the time, and it was basically a supercomputer compared to the PS1. Trust me, this was an uphill battle from the start. I don't bring up this stuff to defend Wrath of Cortex and its shortcomings, but more to highlight how much of a miracle it is that we got the game that we did. I think this goes a long way in explaining why this game is inconsistent with the others, and why so many people did not click with the Wrath of Cortex the same way they did with the trilogy. I would like to add, however, that everything I said earlier still stands. I do like playing the Wrath of Cortex, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I don't notice its problems. Everything I'm about to say, you probably already heard before or noticed yourself. Nevertheless, I still need to run through this list to bring home the full picture. Almost every level in this game either feels confused or kinda bad, and I mean that in multiple ways. As a whole, I'd say this is the most confused level list the series has ever seen, which is kinda weird since each workroom has a theme that the levels are supposed to be working off of. A lot of people will say this is because of the number of vehicles in this game, and while that isn't the entire reason, I will admit it is a big one. Look, you do a lot in this game. You control many wacky and weird machines, and most of them don't control very well. Some are self-explanatory like the plane or the spaceship. I wouldn't say the levels are super engaging, but they're playable. Well, they're playable until the CPU rams their ship into you and kills you from basically full. Yeah, that wasn't annoying during the Coco spaceship level. In other cases, some vehicles feel like ripoffs from the trilogy. The copter pack is literally the jetpack from Crash 2, but just lame. This vehicle has none of the style that the jetpack levels had in 2. Yeah, neither of them felt that good to control, but at least the atmosphere of being in this space station was really cool. You could leer out at the emptiness of space and break crates floating in zero gravity. In Fahrenheit Frenzy, you fly your way through this bleeding orange cavern with so much blinding fire you can barely see Crash. The hazards here are terrible. These green lights that you can't tell how far they shine will kill you unless you fly to the top of the map. I appreciate that the copter pack isn't the whole level and you break into a platforming section after, but it leaves me wondering why even have the copter pack here at all, because it doesn't show up again until the post game. It's just another random gameplay style that doesn't get any chance to have any staying power, and thus the player never gets attached to it. That's why the majority of these vehicles feel like the developers are just trying things. It reminds me of the bug ship and that sinking feeling. This ship has a homing missile weapon that you need to have locked on to the enemies and objective boats to fire, but since it's a one-off vehicle that is never used again, and the game does not know how to do tutorials, you end up flying around the map confused on how to shoot the thing. I remember being stuck on this level for forever as a kid because I genuinely did not know how to shoot the missiles. Maybe I was being a dumb kid right here, but with how many other vehicles there were in this game, it was safe to say that I was probably overwhelmed by the time I had gotten here. And there is still the fact that no other weapon in the series shoots like this. That lack of tutorial problem actually goes further in this game with other vehicles too. Coco's scooter, snowboard, and Crash's four-wheeler give you zero warning that you need to accelerate to run away from the hazards. Yeah, it's a simple control once you know it, but how would you know it? Unless you were someone who actually read the manual, you were out of luck with this. You literally have to learn the hard way by losing a life or two, then just trying random buttons. There's no way to sugarcoat that. That's just poor game communication to the player. In the four-wheeler's case, this could have been avoided if the first time you used this vehicle, you weren't running away from a stampede of rhinos. Maybe if the levels Smokey and the Bandicoot came before Jungle Rumble, you'd be more acclimated with the four-wheeler and how to control it. Again, just a simple tutorial prompt at the bottom of the screen would have fixed this problem, but you see how just a more thought out level placement could have helped alleviate some of this frustration? But then I remembered, this game doesn't even have good level placement to begin with. You see, a downside the route the Cortex has is the elemental warp rooms. Even though that's the main theme the game is working with, that theme is actively working against the game. The biggest reason Naughty Dog created warp rooms in Crash 2 was to have an excuse for Crash to visit a bunch of varied and interesting locations while still fitting into the premise of the game. This way, it made sense for Crash to visit a jungle, snow, and water area in the same warp room. It made for a quick, fun variety. Because of the elemental theming in the Wrath of Cortex, you're not supposed to be given as much variety in one warp room as you normally are. And when you are, it doesn't make sense. Just look at the first warp room. It's supposed to be Rocco, the Earth Elemental's area. Is it though? I can't tell because we spend the whole time here in a snow level, airplane level, ball level, and medieval level. It's completely inconsistent with the theme, but it sets a tone like levels will be as random as always. But then you go into Wawa's area, and it's a nicely crafted set of different levels with a water theme. Unfortunately, again, the theme of this game is working against itself because I don't see a reason why someone would want so much water this close together. And since Traveler's Tale moved Coral Canyon, one of the swimming levels, to the ice section, it looks like they didn't like it either. Can't really blame them because having seashell shenanigans and H2O node this close together does not feel good at all. That's probably because the swimming in this game can start to feel horrible after a while. The levels are really long. There's this weird water filter on the screen that gets annoying to look at. Crates are kind of hard to see because their palette is really dark in this game and kind of blend into the background. The enemies are really ugly and most of them just swim back and forth at like different speeds. Some of them swim into frames so fast, I don't really know how they expected someone to dodge them. There's a over-reliance on mines positioned just off screen to surprise you with a drop on your head. You're often forced to use this really big, clunky submarine that does not come with an extra hit point like the Jet Sub did in Warped. This thing has a huge hitbox and also needs 2 inputs to turn around because Crash has to face the screen for no reason at all, which means those falling mines will most likely kill you a few times if you second guess yourself. I'm telling you, there's no better time to take a break from this game than after coming out of a swimming level. That's what Wawa's warp room feels like. Yeah, maybe you got to do a lot of different things in sections that use water differently, but with the overall feel staying the same for the majority of the warp room, you begin to want something else to shift the mood. The level placement of the elemental theme just works against the idea of the warp rooms, and it affects the overall pace in the game in my opinion. Something that probably doesn't help is just how poorly thought out most of the platforming and overall gameplay is. Let's take another look at Arctic Antics for this. Sure, this level is a very ambitious first level like we stated, but that's the key word right there. This is the first level to a platformer. And what does it have? Everything. Ice physics, enemies by the dozens, a death route, TNT and nitro crates, even though Naughty Dog made it a pattern to never have TNT crates in the first level. Not in Sandy Island, Turtle Woods, or Toad Village had a single crate that can kill you. Why? Because even as far back as the beginning of this franchise, the developers knew to ease in the player. That's why in Crash 1 and 2, the first thing you saw in level 2 is a TNT crate. They wanted you to experiment with a new game mechanic after you had already gotten your feet wet with some gameplay. That way you learn something new early on that you can take with you for the rest of your adventure. It was a means not to overwhelm the player right off the bat. Level 1s are supposed to be more lax. I mean, remember how Insanity Island ended in a dual pathway for the player? One path had a switch crate and a bridge, and the other was a much easier simple path the player could opt for if they weren't ready for that challenge. Or how in the intro level to Strikes Back, the first pit couldn't even kill you. What does Wrath of Cortex do in its level 1? Drop you into a death route with nothing but nitro. Brilliant. When the game isn't trying to throw everything it has at you, it's also failing at its main mechanic half the time. Just look at Jungle Rumble. I think this is this game at its most vulnerable. Outside of the Rhino chase, I wouldn't say anything happens here, other than you using the lamest power known to man for the first time on the bonus round. But just look at my gameplay. What am I doing here? A lot of running forward. I'd be hard pressed to call a lot of what you do in this game platforming. Just look at Crash. This level is aggressively uninteractive, and is filled with the most unused space in the game. There's a major lack of pits or anything interesting. For the most part, that's how the platforming in the Wrath of Cortex is. When you're not forced to do a bunch of mini jumps up some overused staircases, it's flat and filled with awkwardly shaped platforms and really basic jumps that don't evoke much challenge. It's just a lot more simple as a whole in that comparison to the other games. And I think that right there is my biggest gripe with this game. Just how big of a hit the platforming took. I mean, let's face it, this game is going to be compared to Crash Warped until the end of time. I'm pretty much fine with that because I already mentioned the similarities are there, mostly from the setup and the amount of vehicles. What I have a problem with is just how people like to pretend the actual gameplay is so similar. Even though Warped's platforming was filled with dynamic, interesting platforms that often moved and shifted in cool ways, and level layouts that were very thought out and satisfying with how much they wanted you to use your power-ups to traverse their box layouts. Maybe you didn't get to platform as much as you wanted to in Warp, but when you did, you got to do stuff like this. What do you do in the Wrath of Cortex? Pretend to interact with enemies that don't even know you exist. They just infinitely throw their sad projectile while they stare into the void. Seriously, a lot of the enemies in this game look like they've been plucked right off the asset board without any player tracking added on. I can only think of a couple of enemies that are actually aware of you when you get close and aren't attacking at set spots. Like, this enemy is literally just a fish out of water. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Oh, and piggybacking off the weak enemies, you can forget about interesting death animations. Those are completely gone. Can't say I'm surprised, you just kinda die now instead of something funny happening. This game also lacks secrets or any real way to interact with the levels. It really is just crates and sparse enemies. Trust me, you will never find a lever that drops cinder blocks anywhere. Death routes now just rely on nitro crates as the hazard instead of level design or enemies. Yeah, maybe that was done in the past before, but it happens so rarely that it was kinda cool when you find a room full of nitro. Now nitro crates are just everywhere, all the time, inflating the crate total. Please know this, if a Crash game is relying on nitro crates, it means the levels are desperately lacking in interesting attributes. There's also a bunch of little annoyances like falling between platforms when you walk on them, or monkey bars being so slow it physically causes me pain. Crash's movement is a little slippery on quick turnarounds. He's really floaty for some reason, like this might be his highest double jump ever, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I will say Crash has a problem with ascending in the air really slowly, so gauging a jump against something coming at you is actually harder than normal. That's probably because his hitbox is a little bigger than it should be. Crash's power-ups as a whole really aren't highlighted at all in this game. The level design doesn't really work with his classic power-up moveset the way Warp did, so outside of double jumping because you can, you really don't use the powers that much. I really can't think of a time in this game where the Death Tornado spin was required. Yeah, you can use it, but I sometimes forgot I had it because the level design didn't incentivize me to use it. I don't think I need to go into detail about Tiptoe. If you're watching this video, you already know it's the silliest power in the franchise, and I don't think I need to beat a dead horse with that. The Super Body Slam is a random collectible in Coco's post-game death route for some reason, proving this move is completely useless in this game. In retrospect, it's kinda sad the Super Body Slam got completely benched by Tiptoe. I get that Traveler's Tale wanted to make their own move for the game, but replacing a kind of useless move for a useless move, it's just kinda sad. Playing as Coco is so disappointing to say the least. I'm really happy she was finally a playable character that can fully platform, but actually using her is not as fun as it should be. I like that she has different moves, but since she doesn't get a double jump, platforming with her is more of a hindrance than a plus. Her karate kick has a bad hitbox compared to Crash's spin because you have to actually face the direction of something you want to hit, so you could possibly miss an enemy if you aren't looking their way. Her low kick is slow and frankly lame. Most of the time, it can get you killed because she doesn't come out of it fast enough. The only power-ups she does get to use are the Body Slam and Speed Shoes for some reason. I just don't understand why make her if they're going to nerf her this badly. To me, it seemed like it would have been better if she literally just mirrored Crash's moveset. Since all her moves are different and she only uses 2 power-ups, it makes me assume she was planning to do a lot more but got nerfed due to time restraints. If that's not the reason, then Traveler's Tale just doesn't like Coco, which would be crazy. It just makes seeing her pop up on the load screens not as exciting as it should be, and that's a real shame. The post-game in general is nowhere near as satisfying or particularly good as Warp's, which makes sense given what we know about the development, but this makes doing more stuff after the first credits feel very tedious and unrewarding. You can just go back and get any gems you might have missed the first time and do relic runs. Relic runs in this game are fine, I guess. Like I already stated, the platforming levels aren't really designed too dynamically, so they should be kind of a breeze. But you have to also play through a time trial of every vehicle again. Yeah, this is where most people check out. Is it worth it to do all the relics? Well, there's the extra levels. Is it surprising that 4 out of the 5 extra levels are vehicle stages? Look, the best thing I can say about this group of stages is that the environments do stand out. Solar Bowler is probably the coolest with the space backdrop, even though by this point I am tired of the atmosphere. Ice Station Bandicoot is just an ice version of Rings of Power where you race a polar bear. Force of Nature is this horrible auto-scroller facing the screen with Coco's snowboard, where if you miss a crate, you have to restart the entire thing. They also copy and pasted this Christmas tree a million times to fill up this obviously undone level. I'd like to add that this is the last level in the game. Seriously, the last level in the game. Look at it. Well, at least they're consistent. They started with a snow level and ended with a snow level. Bravo. Oh yeah, and you can beat Ghost Town without touching a single button. What more could you ask for? You know, even with a better understanding about this game's development, I still think it's hard for someone to look at all this stuff and determine if this game's shortcomings are a product of the very short development time or just a lack of understanding on Traveler's Tale's part. I, for one, think it's a little bit of both. 12 months to deliver a full-on quality platformer on next-gen hardware was not going to come without concessions. However, I do think people often take for granted just how detail-oriented Naughty Dog was with the Crash series. There were so many little nuances that they picked up game to game that helped make each new Crash game more streamlined and full of character that I think sometimes goes underappreciated. Like all the wacky death animations, and every little pointless secret the games had, or how every single level had its own unique save profile. When I look at the Wrath of Cortex, I can't really think about cool little details like that. I really only see little things that prove this game probably isn't really all the way finished. I look at things like the long loading screens, or all the game's unused space in the levels. I look at the kinda ugly character models and the stiffness of the cutscenes. I look at the talking heads and see how only one character can be on screen at once, so you have to sit there and watch them awkwardly pop in and out to talk to Crash. I noticed things like how the soundtrack that plays in every level was not given a natural loop, so every time a song ends, there's a second of dead air that you hear before the song starts over. Stuff like this in a series that's usually pretty polished sticks out like a sore thumb, and it makes the Wrath of Cortex feel like the odd one out. Trust me, I hate to see this stuff, especially because there's a genuine part of me that feels for Traveler's Tale in 2001. You can tell they really tried their best to bring this game to the finish line, even while basically being brought in to scrape together someone else's work. Seriously, I see the effort. I appreciate how they took the original concepts and made their own elemental premise that worked more in a traditional Crash formula. I, for one, think it's pretty cool how every last level in the first 4 warp rooms is a reincarnation of the Cortex research centers from the Crash world concept, themed after the elemental of that section. It adds so much needed cohesion to the level selections. I love how they went and made their own interesting characters, even though they didn't get much screen time. I think the elemental masks are really cool. I wish we could have gotten more of them in this story. And like I said, crunch is the best thing to come out of the Wrath of Cortex. Traveler's Tale made a series fan favorite, and that's really impressive. I appreciate that they wanted to give Crash more fun things to do in the levels. Yeah, they went overboard, but you know, with this much variety, you can't say they weren't genuinely trying to make something fun. They might have gone about it the wrong way, but you can never say they did not try. You can never call 13 different gameplay mechanics lazy. You just can't. This is why, even despite all the issues, despite all the mistakes, I still love this game. I do. I just can't bring myself to hate it. Flawed as this game is, I can confidently say this is still an honest Crash Bandicoot adventure. It's a game that I still think is worth my time. I think that's why playing it still gives me a good feeling, all things considered. I mean, just for this video, I played the game from beginning to end 3 times, and one of those runs was at 100%. It didn't feel like I was forcing my gameplay. You can still get that good flow state Crash games always have, and genuinely I enjoyed playing it. I think that's why I loved this game as a kid. The Raptor Cortex truly felt like a continuation of the trilogy at that time. I know I was too young and dumb to realize a whole different development team made the game, but isn't that a good thing? That a young fan could pick this game up on their next generation console and have the game feel like nothing has changed? I think we sometimes forget that video games are products of their time. Yeah, Raptor Cortex did not review as stellar as anything Naughty Dog did, but if there's one thing everyone agreed on was the feel of Crash Bandicoot was still there. Maybe it was a weaker entry, but the game was still Crash. We didn't have an extra 20 plus years of 3D platforming evolution to compare it against like we do now. I'm not using that as an excuse, but I will admit, sometimes I don't quite think everything is being taken into account when the game is talked about these days. Yeah, I'm aware this game kinda aged like milk, but I think that's okay. Not every game in a series is going to completely reinvent the wheel and blow you away. Not every single thing I play has to be a masterpiece. Sometimes you get some okay games that can still be interesting in their own respect. That's what I think interests me the most with the Raptor Cortex, is the adversity. That this game was created off the back of a massive shift in development and gaming generations, a rush product built on the concepts of a completely different group of people. It's fascinating, truly. It makes me look at this game in a completely different light and actually appreciate it even more that we even got the game that we did. I'm glad I could see the game through this lens, instead of one that just wants to put this game down every step of the way. I think this game is worth more than that to me. From the child playing it on that Christmas morning, to the adult reminiscing on his favorite games. I feel like I've gone full circle with the Raptor Cortex and can now understand it better. I feel like I can fully grasp this unfortunate legacy this game leaves behind and look even more fondly to the evolution it set the stage for in this lovely franchise. Because from this point forward, Crash gameplay would reshape and reform into a more experimental frame. What we know as traditional Crash gameplay would expand as developers attempt to widen it to its natural next level. Some would say it's crazy to try to take Crash Bandicoot and put him into more of an open format, while people like me would welcome what seemed at the time to be Crash stepping into what felt like insanity.
Get ready to face my wrath, Crash Bandicoot!